Welcome to 1+1, I'm Melanie Tate. My guest is the actor Heather Mitchell.
Ashka!
Heather's starring role in the TV series Spellbinder is seared into memories of millennials across the world. She's appeared in major Australian movies such as Proof, Muriel's Wedding and most recently, Palm Beach.
The way he looks at you. Oh, he's just too vain to wear his glasses.
But it was always the theatre that had Heather's heart, with dozens of major stage roles in a 4-decade career.
I'm not spending the day...
It hasn't always been the easiest path, with illness and unemployment sending her into untold hardship. But now, in her 60s, she's more in demand than ever before. Heather Mitchell, welcome to 1+1.
Thank you so much.
Heather, there's a great trick you can do in Australia, Pakistan, China, Poland, that if you want to know somebody's age, you just show them a picture of you, and if they say, hey, it's Ashka, you know they're between 29 and 35. So please, for the rest of us who dwell outside that age range, who is Ashka and why is she such an icon?
The minute you said Pakistan, I thought Bangladesh was coming. I thought, I know what you're going to ask. Look, Ashka is a character who I played in a series which was shot in the 90s, early 90s, in China, in Poland and in Australia, called Spellbinder.
Do you think you can defeat a spellbinder?
And I'm serious, I seem to have this fan club in Bangladesh, and it's... in the afternoons it was shown, so school kids in Australia would sort of rush home and watch it. It was a fantastic experience, I must say, as a young actress. My husband was the DOP on it, and we had 4 months in Poland and then revisited there. We had many months in Shanghai shooting this show, and Ashka was this woman who was... I remember saying to the director, so who is Ashka? Like, you know, how do you see her? And he said to me, well, she's just have a European accent and she's a woman who wishes she was a man. So I thought, well, that's enough to go on. And so each episode my accent changes, really, I think, from, you know, 1 minute it's Polish and then it's a bit of German and then... So it sort of travels around Europe.
It is forbidden to build new things. This boy
But it was thoroughly enjoyable piece of work, and the character was so much fun. And the beautiful thing is now that all those kids who are watching it are now in their 30s and sort of say how much it meant to them and how much they loved it. And that is so special to have done something which involved children.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It was fantastic.
So, Heather, speaking of childhood, you spent some of your childhood in Jamaica because of your dad's work in forestry. What does a childhood in Jamaica look like?
Oh, look, Jamaica was just incredible. I have only wonderful memories of my childhood. My father was a forester, and so he was very in love with trees and plants, and he was doing erosion control all around the world. And we had... My memories of it as each of us children had our own trees. We had our own guava, mango, banana. We had every tree imaginable, which was ours, which we could climb and we could pick. We had an incredible freedom as children there. I had this wonderful Jamaican boy next to us, Christopher Lopez, I remember his name was, who I spent most of my childhood with. It was just an idyllic and beautiful time. I mean, Jamaica obviously has changed enormously since then, but it was a wonderful place to be to have my childhood. It was beautiful.
So you go from kind of the tropical climes of Jamaica to the classroom at Camden PS in it's kind of rural New South Wales, Camden. Yeah. What kind of a student were you?
I found... obviously, I think now, if I'd been diagnosed now, I would have had ADD inattentive and probably dyslexia as well. So I struggled academically. My father... who was a very loving and beautiful man. I came home from school one day and nothing was said, but he had painted the inside of my wardrobe, sort of full length. He'd painted blackboard paint and left a box of chalk and a duster there. Nothing was ever said, and I started at school writing down just notes, thinking I can't absorb all the information, so I'll just take a few notes. So I'd take these notes and get home, and I would dress up in my mother's clothes. I would sneak them from her bedroom, and I'd put on I remember a fawn woolen sort of below-knee skirt. I'd put on a twin set and pearls, and I'd put my hair in a French bun and put on the makeup. And I called myself Miss Mumford. And I would get the notes from school and I would start to teach myself. So I'd put the imaginary me on the bed and I would, with great love and interest, I would talk to the imaginary me and I'd say, okay, Heather, now we've got this equation and this is what we're going to do, and I'd write it up on the board and I would teach myself. And everything I taught myself I remember. And I passed every subject by doing this. So I started to, and with the principal would come to the door sometimes, the imaginary principal, whose name is Mr. Burden, and I'd say, no, I'm sorry, I have no time for you, I'm working with Heather. And so I think my father somehow knew that I would understand the meaning of this blackboard and that I would somehow, and I think because of my dyslexia, which was also seeing black print on white paper, was very difficult for me to read, somehow the white chalk on the blackboard reversed that, and that made it much more accessible for me. So my father really, his extraordinary insight into me and doing such a practical thing for me completely changed my approach to learning. And clever? I think I still employ it in many ways, in when I'm learning lines or when I'm doing things. We're doing it as someone, a sort of an internal mentor, sort of teaching myself, guiding myself. And I use that through many things in life, actually.
So Mrs. Mumford, would she have been your first big part?
Yes, she would actually.
Right.
Yes. Mrs. Mumford, I would visit her daily. I mean, she would come out daily and she was there for me every day after school and on weekends. No one else, I don't think, knew about her. I would change out of my clothes and go to dinner, and then I'd come back and adopt her.
Did you make that connection at the time? I mean, we're talking, you were, what, 12 years old?
Yeah, I was probably 11 or 12.
11 or 12. Did you make any sort of connection with that and with acting, with...
No, I didn't know that there was such a profession as acting. I hadn't been to any plays at that age. We'd seen films, but I didn't know that acting was a profession. I had no idea. I mean, I'd looked at wonderful books and seen lots of films of actresses, particularly I loved the films of the 30s and 40s and in the 50s. But it didn't really occur to me that that was a profession, that you could actually do that. I think it was only in retrospect that I realised that what I was doing was connecting that. But I think what she served more, which has served me very well being an actor, is a trust of myself and knowing that I'm there for myself and knowing that when times are difficult or when you have challenges and when you have rejections and all those things that go with being an actor, that somehow there's a core of there is this character inside you who is there for you, if that makes sense.
So that's actually probably a really valuable early lesson for you, because your mother was sick for your entire childhood.
Well, not my entire childhood, but from when I was 10, my mother was diagnosed with leukaemia. And although she kept it completely secret, none of us knew, and it was never discussed. And this was in the early 70s, or late 60s, early 70s, when illness was not talked about. I mean, you did not discuss. Cancer was certainly not something that was ever discussed. I remember the woman next door to us dying of breast cancer, but that would never be talked about. So my mother, also for her own philosophical and spiritual reasons, decided not to tell us. I in fact came home from school one day and had an assignment. It was to be on a debating team, and the topic was ignorance is bliss, and I was to speak for the government. And I remember going to my mother's bedroom because her sort of life was in the bedroom for such a long time, and that became just very normal, and that where we'd congregate. And I remember sitting on the floor and saying to her, I've got to do this debate, and ignorance is bliss, and do I think ignorance is bliss? And I remember her saying to me, she posed to me a number of situations. Would you want to know? Wouldn't you want to know? Is it better to be ignorant? And the last one she said to me, I remember, was, if you knew someone you loved was dying, would you want to know? And I was arguing for the government. And I said, no, you wouldn't want to know, because the person would change their behaviour towards you. You'll behave differently with them. It would be better not to know, so that you could live your life as you were, that you wouldn't be sad. And so I gave from a sort of a 10, 11-year-old's perspective on a debating team why I wouldn't want to know. And she saw that as a sign, because she had only been diagnosed that day, apparently.
Oh, my goodness.
And so she thought, this is a sign. I'm not telling anyone. Only my father knew. She kept it a secret until literally. After she died, we were told. But I always knew.
Right.
I knew she was dying, but
Right.
it was never discussed.
What happened to you and to the family when she died?
When my mother died, my sister and brother had both left home. My brother had gone to New York to live when he was quite young still, when he was in his early 20s. And my father, who loved camping and loved travelling, he basically filled his pockets up and he went travelling. And I was totally fine with that. So I pretty much soon after got on a train and went to Sydney, which is where I had a couple of girlfriends, one girlfriend in particular who was from Canberra, who I knew, and moved into a shared household with them with just a small bag. And amazingly, my father, when the house was packed up that we lived in, because my parents had travelled extensively, they did have things from China and where they had met and a whole lot of different things. My father had basically packed up the house and given everything to the Smith family. So they'd come and collected the whole household. And bizarrely, the house I lived in, the shared house, was in Glenmore Road, Paddington at Five Ways. And I remember walking down the street and getting to Oxford Street there, and there were 3 antique shops in a row. And this was months later, but walking past the first antique shop and seeing my mother's things in this antique shop window and thinking how extraordinary these are. The one was a brocade dressing gown she'd had made in China, some brass earrings with wild horses on them and things, and a tea set. And I remember just thinking, oh my goodness, and wanting to have one of them. So I went in and put a lay-by down on the earrings. And afterwards people said to me, oh, that must have been awful seeing your mother's things there, and they had huge price tags on them. And I thought it was strange, but there again I thought my father's decision had been a wise one, because what was I going to do with all those things? And that was a great lesson for me to see those things and go, that's okay, it's fine, don't have to have things.
Heather, the home that you had in Glenmore Road was what brought you to NIDA. Was it then that you discovered that you could have a career as an actor?
It was amazing being with people who were at NIDA. So the people I was living with were stage managers, designers, and they were in 3rd year at NIDA when I moved in there. And so I got to meet all these amazing people, and I did feel that instantaneous thing of, oh my gosh, these are my people. However, I had already enrolled in Sydney College of the Arts, which was its very first year, and had an incredible time, also met lifelong friends there, but did realise while I was doing that course that in fact I really wanted to become an actor. So I did audition for NIDA the following year, and it sounds very arrogant, but felt absolutely confident I'd get in. I thought, I have to do this. This is what's going to happen. And I was thrilled to be accepted.
Did you have to make a deliberate choice to go into theatre as opposed to film and telly?
Yes. Back then, and this is in the very early 80s, 1980, a producer said to me, you need to make a choice now. Do you want to do soap? It was literally soap, not television, but soap. Do you want to do theatre? Or do you want to see if you can get some film work? But that wasn't really even a question, because there wasn't the film industry that we have now. Theatre was my love. It was, I loved the immediacy of theatre and the community of theatre. So theatre, that was no question for me. I was offered when I first left actually, I was offered a country practice, which I said no to, and no regrets there or anything, but it was great to see how that show went on and became such a well-loved show. But no, theatre, it was a very easy choice for me. But it was a decision then, yeah.
Have you got a moment, I mean, this might be really difficult, a moment in your entire theatrical career that is the most memorable, the most exciting, you know, that if you got to play again and again and again, it would be that particular one? There
are a few really, but I would say there was a show I did called Dream Play, in which I felt that really experience of, I felt like everyone on stage was completely in there together. But then there are experiences like, I remember doing a play with Richard Roxburgh called Burn This, where my hair was sort of teased and curly, and I had to smoke on stage, which I'm not very good at. And I remember feeling everything was going well, and I'm talking to him, I'm smoking, I'm going like this, and I came back and the cigarette wasn't in my hand. I thought, where's the cigarette? And then we could sort of smell burning. And then someone in the audience said, your hair's on fire. And it wasn't on fire, but it was smoking, and the cigarette had got stuck in my hair. But a moment like that even was so wonderful, because although it breaks the moment of the show, it actually didn't. And it somehow makes the audience so real to you, and in many ways relaxed me so completely and allowed them in even more, and that they enjoyed it more. And I think audiences generally, they sort of love it when they can tell something's going wrong or something's not quite right. And you win them over with the humanity of it, really.
Heather, I've heard it be said around the traps that one of the greatest treasures you can have is a Heather Mitchell opening night toast art. And in fact, you did an exhibition earlier this year at the National Art School of your toasts.
Yes.
What are these toasts? Where did they come from?
Look, I was doing a show with Philip Seymour Hoffman directing, and Brendan Cowell and Wayne Blair. And in the show, Sam Shepard play, there was one scene towards the end where the boys steal all these toasters, and the toast was flying everywhere. And at the end of the show every night there was toast littering the floor, and the stage manager was throwing it out, and I thought, what a waste. And then backstage one day I was looking after one of the actors' twin girls and was looking for things to do. We pulled out a piece of the toast. I found a jar of Vegemite, watered down the Vegemite, found a chopstick which we dipped in, and we started drawing on the toast. So that's where it originated. And so since then it's become an opening night gift where I now do, it was Vegemite originally, and now I use paint now because the Vegemite would deteriorate too much. So now I paint portraits or images from shows as not only a way of thanking the people and giving people a gift, but to as a memory of that person or of that show. And I just love doing them. I love them. They're now preserved. They will last forever.
They will last forever.
Well, they're preserved so that they, the higher the sugar content of the bread, the better.
Right. So what's the idyllic bread that you would use?
A good old Tip Top, really.
Really? White bread?
Just a good starchy white bread.
Great. Heather, you touched very lightly before about the life of a freelance actor and the difficulty that can come. And as an actress, you know, you're often at the whim of the director who wants to hire you, the decision makers, etc. What does this mean as a freelancer when you need to take time off?
Well, it's a great question because it's freelance, because people, you are at the mercy in a way of whether you're accepted for a job, whether you're the one. So actors have a lot of time off anyway, but it's not necessarily at the time you want to have off. So in my experience, my youngest son was very ill when he was a baby, so I did consciously and take time off. And yes, you know, financially that's tricky, but it's also tricky because you're thinking, I hope I haven't burnt bridges. I hope I haven't lost favour with people. And those thoughts, of course, you know, can pervade your mind. Not long after that, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So this was also when my children were 2 and 4 years old. And the treatment of that was quite a long treatment, as I'd been given some of the wrong treatment, so I had to do it again. So it was quite a lengthy period of time. So it did go over nearly a 2-year period that I didn't work. So I didn't think about work particularly during that time because I just wanted to be well and to get well. But it also very much affected my partner, my husband at the time, because I think in our industry what happens is when you take time, if you actually actively take time out, even if it's to go and study or if it's to travel, it's difficult because people firstly think you've disappeared. If you're not seen, you're not around. So that's tricky. But it's also, in my situation, I was unwell. So I think people are still quite frightened of when people are unwell. We think that they're not going to be capable of fulfilling their work. They're not going to ever get well again, maybe. There's a weakness that is still, I think, runs parallel with the thought of sickness. And then it affected my husband in that people thought possibly he wasn't well enough. I mean, he wasn't going to be able to work because he had to look after me, or that it would be too much strain on him. So basically there was a 2-year period there where neither of us really had employment. And so financially, that's a huge strain on people anyone who's a freelancer, really. So, you know, it's what it is, but it definitely does affect your career.
So what happens when you have 2 years out of work? How do you survive?
We were very fortunate because we owned a house. I mean, some people don't, but we were really fortunate. When we met, we each had property and we put the property together when we bought a house, a really lovely house that we were going to live in. And it became very evident to us that we would need to sell that house in order to, and pay back a lot of debts and a lot of medical debts. So we very fortunately were able to sell. So we sold the house, we paid back our debts, and we ended up with only a very small amount of money left. But we had our health, and we felt, you know, always looking at what are the good things here. But I have to say, and I'd like to tell you that one thing that's so extraordinary is that one day I went to the letterbox and there was a handwritten letter in the mail, which was unusual because they were usually bills. And I opened this and there was this beautiful letter which I can almost remember. I still have it and I can remember almost every word of it. It was written to Ms. Mitchell, and it was basically saying, my husband and I for many years have admired and enjoyed your work. You've given us an enormous amount of pleasure. We have more than enough and we have decided to start giving our money away to people who have affected our lives. Please do not try and find out who I am, Mrs. Anon. So I read this, and enclosed was a cheque for $30,000.
Oh my goodness.
And to this day I do not know who that was. I did try to find out and it wasn't possible. We eventually banked the cheque. It went straight in. Without the generosity of that person, I truly don't know how the next year was going to really happen, which is why I find also in this business the generosity of people in our business. Without philanthropy, there would be no theatre in Australia, really. And for people who do have more than enough, who find it within their power to give it away to people, and I don't just mean individually, to companies, to organisations, to charities. I mean, really, we are in a country which is very fortunate, but without people's generosity, we really wouldn't be doing many of the things that we can do.
Heather, there's been a reckoning with the Me Too movement, but has there really been? I mean, has it changed rehearsal rooms and film sets?
I think, you know, with the Me Too movement, with everything that's happening at the moment, and thank goodness it is, I think we're still trying to find a language to help express and articulate the abuse and lack of equality that there has been for such a long time that women feel and still feel. And in our industry, it's no exception. Obviously, the press have been very focused on the entertainment industry for good reason. However, there are very many people in our industry who would never even consider ever crossing that line. And I think, and wonderfully, things have been put in place now to make sure that doesn't happen. However, I have had experiences in the past, particularly in my 20s, where I have felt the line has definitely been crossed, and I have felt fearful, and I would spend my time before going on stage in preparation for how to deal with that person, not so much in how to deal with the show or the character or anything. So in the past, I've never felt there was ever the ability to discuss it, talk about it with anyone. Other people were witness to it, but nothing was ever said. And I think my response was anyway, I always felt pity for the person who, I would immediately feel sorry for them, which was an interesting reaction. I would think, oh, there's something wrong with in their life that they're behaving like this. So I would excuse it, and I would keep away from it as much as I could. But when it's in front of an audience, when you feel something is happening to you in front of an audience, whether it's a couple of people or 500 or however many it is particularly humiliating, because you feel that those people are witnessing it even though they're not aware of it. And there was one instance where I did feel quite frightened and couldn't work out in my fear why someone in the audience didn't stand up and say, what's going on here? But of course they couldn't see that it wasn't part of the show. So it's very confusing when you're trying to stay in your role, when you're trying to tell the story you're trying to tell, when you're trying to work and keep the chemistry with that person on stage, and feeling frightened at the same time.
How do you think things might have been different for your career had the Me Too movement been around in the early 80s?
Do you know, when I first heard about this Me Too thing, I thought, gee, I've escaped all that how fortunate have I been? And what's been so interesting, the fact that this young generation are challenging all of this and are definitely challenging my generation, is that I've remembered all sorts of things, and not just in our industry, but, you know, the man on the train, the gardener at school, and I'm not saying I was raped by these people or anything like that, but I was definitely in situations multiple times. The first person who ever gave me a job, not in the industry, but a job, and all were men, and all were men who I felt were taking advantage of a situation of their power. I didn't understand that at the time, but I do now. In terms of my career, I look back now and I go, wow, yes, I didn't realise I was making choices. I didn't realise I was choosing things, but I was making choices to keep away from certain people. I was making choices to not do any more television. I made choices of avoidance. And so I would hope that out of this, if one thing that happens is that it helps the men and women, particularly the young ones, to sort of say, oh, I have this choice and I will go and speak about this, whatever it is, so that my choice, I'm in control of my choice, and that I'm making it not out of fear or an avoidance, but because it's the right thing for me at this time.
The world we live in, it's over for us.
So Heather, now, just to finish up, you've recently had major roles back on screen in Palm Beach and the new Tim Minchin series, Upright. Now, these are both destined to have big lives as international property. So I wonder, how excited are you about the next phase of your career?
As I'm looking at my 60s, I am so excited. I'm excited, but I'm always a bit excited. But I think I would love to be to have the opportunity to tell stories about women of my age, like real stories. I do not understand why getting older should not be even more interesting than being young. I just think the older I get, the more I talk to people of my age, and I just go, wow, your life is incredible. The stories you have to tell are so amazing. So I just call to all writers and just say, write great stories, write great roles for women and men in their 60s and 70s, because I look also at the actors who I've admired in their 60s and 70s and wish that I'd seen more of them on screen and on stage and heard what their stories were.
Heather Mitchell, it's been delightful having you on 1+1. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was the actor Heather Mitchell. You can watch our programs on iView or on our website. Thanks for your company.